Mr. Speaker, I was very proud to just speak this week at the Future of Energy Global Summit. Now, of course, the member for Lakeland would have been a much better speaker. She has so much knowledge and experience, and I just want to take a moment and wish my seatmate the very best. She is a fierce advocate for her constituents and our shared conservative values. Now, thank you very much. She's in our thoughts and prayers. And the panel I was on was very relevant to today's topic. The panel was called Making Major Projects Viable. Of course, this is something we as conservatives have been advocating for the last decade, whether it's ports, bridges, track, reactors, and of course my favorite as an Albertan, pipelines. The conference was amazing and the panel was incredible. But of course, I wanted to do my best to prepare for the panel. So I researched the bios of the panelists, I researched the proposed major federal projects, and then I received a copy of the 2023 white paper that included the presentations in the inaugural year of the conference. And lo and behold, the Prime Minister had presented in 2023 at this conference. And I thought, this is interesting. Let's see what he has to say. Now, the topic of his speech was the challenges and the opportunities of the energy transition. Very interesting. Okay, I'm listening. His title then was United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Action and for Finance. I thought, okay, let's see what he has to say. Key point. The presenter highlighted the need for approximately an additional $3 trillion per year for a quarter of a century to meet the Paris Agreement and net zero targets. $3 trillion for a quarter century. This from the man who is trying to convince Canadians he has their best interests at heart. This from the man who wants us to believe that he is for industry and for productivity, for the common good of our nation. This from the man who promised Canadians that he would increase productivity and rein in spending. Now, my mother taught me a very important lesson when I was a young woman, when I had a close friend let me down, and I think it applies here. And that lesson is, when somebody tells you who you are, you should believe them. When somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them. When somebody asks for $3 trillion, when somebody creates a deficit of $78 billion, when somebody puts forward a budget of $414 billion, when somebody is comfortable with a $50 billion interest payment on debt annually, that somebody is telling you who they are. And when somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them. In the Prime Minister's book, Values, he spent years evangelizing carbon pricing. Carbon taxes, he insisted, should increase. Yet when polling indicated a majority of Canadians rejecting carbon pricing, a position that was the cornerstone of Conservative policy under the leader of the official opposition, he announced in his 2025 platform that he had eliminated carbon pricing. This, of course, was not the case. The industrial carbon price remained. But this is no surprise given his previous claim that Canadian federal carbon pricing framework is a model for other nations. So, after acting for years as the global spokesperson for carbon pricing, he arrives as the Liberal candidate for Prime Minister and claims that he will do away with it. Yet, he retains the industrial carbon tax. In his book, he goes so far as to say that global interests should take priority over national interests. And we can only assume that he also within that includes Canada. The Canadian energy sector has some of the strictest environmental regulations in the world. Yet the Prime Minister and the government continues to impose additional barriers, citing international commitments. This approach scares away investors, delays projects, and forces Canada to rely on oil from countries with no transparency or no environmental responsibility. When somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them. Then there are the things that the Prime Minister would like Canadians to believe he has achieved. The Prime Minister claimed in February of 2025 at his campaign launch in Edmonton that he had helped manage multiple crises and saved not one, but two economies. The leaders who were in charge at the time have different stories to tell. Former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper, the greatest Prime Minister in the history of Canada for now, wrote the Prime Minister's experience isn't all it's cracked up to be. He said, his experience is not the day-to-day management of Canada's economy during the global financial crisis. He went on, I have listened with increasing belief to the Prime Minister's attempt to take credit for things he had little or nothing to do with. In addition, he has been doing this at the expense of the late Jim Flaherty, rest in peace, among the greatest finance ministers in Canada's history, who sadly is not here to defend his record. But Harper goes on, let me be very clear. The hard calls during the 2006-2009 global financial crisis were made by Jim. Prime Minister Stephen Harper went on to say that his record as an advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Liberals was so bad. Likewise, former Prime Minister of England, Liz Truss, said the Prime Minister did a terrible job as the Bank of England's governor. She counts the Prime Minister as a regular among those who caused the British pound to drop to its lowest ever rate against the US dollar, citing them as those who believe in big government and high taxation. According to his record, he printed too much money, something we have seen in Canada under the Liberal government, lost control of regulation, provided over a steep decline of London, and most seriously politicized the bank. In the years since the Prime Minister left, it is written that his successors have been struggling to clear up the mess that the Prime Minister left. This misrepresentation even exists within his own party. He claimed in the English language Liberal leaders debate that it was my privilege to work with Prime Minister Paul Martin when he balanced the books and kept the books balanced. The only problem is that the Prime Minister started out in finance in 2004, according to his own LinkedIn page, almost a decade after Prime Minister Martin's ship-writing 1995 budget, and well after Martin finished balancing the books in 1998. Finally, we arrive at the topic of today's debate, the budget and its implementation. The Prime Minister stated that we need discipline for our spending. It is absolutely necessary, and that Canadians could expect a prudent budget. However, the Prime Minister's spending plans make his predecessor, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, seem like a tight-fisted miser. We have seen in his budget an increase in spending and a further $90 billion in deficit spending over 4 years. Of course, that's only if the government meets its targets, which they have not done in years. They have consistently had much higher deficits than even their own projections call for. These are very prudent numbers, the Prime Minister has said. $78 billion deficit, $414 billion in spending this fiscal year alone, $50 billion annually in interest on the debt. This is not prudence, Mr. Speaker, but this is what the Prime Minister would like to have Canadians believe. Mr. Speaker, the greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. The Prime Minister wants us to believe that he has put forward a budget of austerity and a budget of disciplined spending, but he also wants us to believe that he saved two economies. But when we look at his actions, they tell us otherwise. But as poor as his actions are, his own words speak even stronger. People will charge me with being elitist or with globalist, which happens to be exactly what we need. That means, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will always put his wealthy friends first. He will always put nations before Canada. His loyalty does not lie with Canada or with Canadians. He has told us in his own words exactly who he is. And when somebody tells you who they are, You should believe them. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Merci beaucoup.
Then comments. Question and commentary. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a lot to take in. You know, it's interesting. She said that Stephen Harper was the greatest Prime Minister Canada's ever had. Wow, Mr. Speaker.
Well, order. The member can resume.
From the top, Mr. Speaker. You know, after making that bold statement, it was Stephen Harper that actually appointed the current Prime Minister to be the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Mr. Speaker. Now, having said that, I can assure the member opposite she's in some wonderland to think that Stephen Harper would be in the top 20 in terms of Prime Ministers. Let me amplify that by saying that this Prime Minister has done more in terms of building Canada strong in 8 months than Stephen Harper did in 10 years. Can the member give us any indication in terms of something grand that Stephen Harper actually built in 10 years?
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister Stephen Harper is world-renowned for having navigated Canada through the 2008 financial crisis. I think it's a shame that this member doesn't recognize this. And I'd like to correct the record. I said that his record of what he said, I said that Prime Minister Stephen Harper was the greatest Prime Minister for now. That is until the member for Battle River Crowfoot becomes our Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker.
Here, right. Here.
Point of order, the Honourable Chief Government Whip.
Mr. Speaker, the member a few moments ago made a comment in her speech to the effect that the Prime Minister's interests do not lie within Canada. And I think that it is extremely, I would like my point of order to be heard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it is impugning motive. When we currently have members that are asking ours to apologize because they ask a question that implies whether or not their interests lie in Canada or Russia, which is currently going on, we're asked to apologize for that. But yet we can have a member in this House suggest that another member's interests do not lie within upholding our country and the people of our country is extremely inefficient, inappropriate, and implies that their motives are not the best of intentions. And all honourable members' motives must be treated that way. So I would encourage you to ask the member to apologize and retract that comment.
Order. Very briefly on the same point of order.
Yeah, just Chair, the member is conflating two very different cases. The chairs have ruled in the past about equating members' positions with those of violent authoritarian regimes or suggesting that they're acting as agents of violent authoritarian regimes. I think that's clearly very different from saying something that a member doesn't like that may suggest other things about their motivations. Those are two very different things. Obvious.
Order. I'm going to start by saying I'm going to ask all honourable members be very judicious in what they say in this place. We do not impugn motives in such a way to the dignity or the respect of individual members. I'm going to look back exactly what was said, and if needed, we'll come back to the House with a more formal ruling. At this point, though, we'll go to questions and comments. Question and commentaire. L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We agree with the Conservative Party regarding the Liberal Party's budget, including the fact that we think there's a lot of waste with a generational deficit, $118 billion. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech and ask about the fact that here in this budget, oil and gas tax credits are being extended till 2040. Previously, it was 2035. Collectively, that was already going to cost us collectively $83 billion to taxpayers to support the oil and gas companies that don't need the money. But with this extension, it will actually cost $100 billion, the tax credit to oil and gas. So does my colleague not agree that this is an excellent example of wasting public monies?
Calgary-Midnapore.
Merci beaucoup.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore. I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. There are always a lot of examples of waste in this budget that we saw. Of course, we should try to reduce waste, whether the Liberals or any other party. But I am very proud to come from Alberta, where we have contributed a great deal to the country. The real problem here is the fact that there is waste. As a country, we need money to invest in projects throughout the country. Whether it comes from Alberta or Ontario, we need funds in this country for our national projects. But I completely agree that there is waste, and for me, that's the real problem here. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. L'honorable député de Drummond.
The honourable member for Drummond. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech, and I'd like to congratulate her on her French, Mr. Speaker. We always appreciate hearing French. I would like to talk about the crisis in the media. That's something that concerns us a great deal, especially this week, Mr. Speaker. There is a simple solution that would not require money from taxpayers. I'm speaking, of course, of the digital services tax that the Liberals abolished this summer due to Donald Trump's threats. It could easily be changed into a 3% royalty that could be imposed on the digital giants that would enable us to reestablish our media ecosystem, protect our culture. What do the Conservatives think of this proposal? 40 seconds, please. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that for both our parties, it's very clear that the government wants to control the media. The Conservatives are concerned about this. I am from Alberta. My colleague is from Quebec. These are the two provinces that have a desire for independence. Whether from Alberta or Quebec, we don't want the media to be under government control. So we know there's a real problem here. But for me, the biggest problem is how much the government wants to continue enforcing that control.